Hello, hello. I'm Deborah Holt Noel, executive producer of the Black Issues Forum program and host of the North Carolina Weekend Show on PBS North Carolina. I am very excited to be here today, and on behalf of WNCU Radio 90.7 FM, welcome. And thank you for joining us today for a very important conversation around the upcoming 2024 election on November 5th. You know, while there is a lot of talk about who's voting and how they'll vote, the focus and attention a lot are on those who are undecided or have decided that they're going to sit this one out. Maybe that's you or someone you know. There are different reasons why eligible voters may be discouraged or confused about the upcoming election. But stick around, because whether you're a first-time voter or you've been voting for years, we're going to break down topics like the Electoral College versus the popular vote, voter eligibility, how to navigate challenges that disproportionately affect Black, Brown, and underserved communities, like voter suppression and misinformation. We're going to cover all of that over the next hour. And I have an incredibly knowledgeable panel of experts here today. I'm going to call them experts because they're very knowledgeable, and they're going to be sharing valuable insights about what is at stake in this election and any election, really, how to make sure that your vote counts and the importance of getting engaged in the political process. We want to ensure that everyone leaves this conversation feeling empowered and ready to take action, because guess what? Your vote matters. It really, really does. So let's go ahead and get to know our panel. I want to introduce first Dr. Artemisia Stanberry. She is an associate professor of political science at North Carolina Central University here in Durham, North Carolina. She teaches American government, contemporary Black political thought, and special topic courses in the politics of race and crime, as well as the politics of race, class, and gender in presidential elections. And she's worked for 5 members of Congress and served 2 terms as president of the Congressional Black Associates. I'm so excited to have you here with us. And we also have Dr. Adrienne Jones. Dr. Jones is an assistant professor of political science at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. She's well-versed in the history and politics of Black Americans and public policy issues related to the Black experience. Her primary research focuses on voting rights, voter suppression, and elections. Welcome, Dr. Jones.
Good evening.
We also have Dr. Larry S. Perry II, an assistant professor of religious studies and Africana studies at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. His work focuses on the history of the American religious left, its thoughts, thinkers, politics, practice, and its intersection with racial justice in the U.S. He has also served as a fellow at the Center for American Progress Leadership Institute. Dr. Perry, thank you for joining us. First, I want to open up with sort of a general question to give us some context, and that is, what's at stake in this upcoming election? I'm going to direct this first question to you, Dr. Jones. What is at stake, particularly with regard to the decision to participate and vote or sit this one out?
This is a really high stakes election that arguably is going to have an impact on our form of government. There are absolutely limitations to our democracy as it exists now, but one of the parties in the election this year is really interested in shifting towards authoritarianism. And I think the other party is looking to maintain the kind of separation of powers and democratic framework that we have right now. I've been talking with my students about the fact that, you know, the former president has essentially control over the Supreme Court right now. And so if he becomes the president, it's going to essentially begin to collapse the separation of powers at the federal level. And we don't know what will happen to the congressional races, but you know, that could be a third branch of government that is aligned with his party. And if that happens, that means that we don't have the kind of alternatives in the federal system to to express grievances or to attempt to make changes if we're not getting what we want from one of the other branches. One of the ways that Black people were able to make progress through the civil rights movement was through the Supreme Court and through the federal court system, to some degree through the presidency. And some of that required that those branches not sort of all be controlled by the same party and the same frame of thought. So I think it's extremely important, even if you think voting isn't that big a deal and you aren't that interested in it, if you would please vote this time. I think it's critical that the American people express their opinion about who they would like to serve them and what kind of government they would like to have.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Dr. Perry, what do you think is at stake?
Yeah, there's just so much at stake, right? There's a particularly when we think about what Dr. Jones just said, when we think about Supreme Court justices, and we think about the way in which the Supreme Court has kind of been weaponized, right? Against some of our most vulnerable communities, right? We really need everyone's voice to be kind of heard on this, particularly when we think about one of the Supreme Court justices, right, that called Brown v. Board an overreach, right? That could essentially take us back to pre 1954 world, right, where Black folks are catching hell, and there is no kind of checks and balances on who has access to certain institutions, who has access to certain businesses. I mean, this is we cannot take this election lightly by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, not at all.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. And what I'm hearing so far from Dr. Jones and Dr. Perry, we're talking about what's at stake in this upcoming election, whether you decide to participate or not participate. I'm hearing about your voice, your choices, your access, and those things are all on the line depending on which way this election goes. Dr. Stanberry, what are your thoughts about what's at stake?
Yeah, I concur with my colleagues there, especially this idea of the checks and balances and how important that is. And I would say this, in 2020, you had 81 million people who voted for Biden. You had 70 million or so who voted for Trump. You had about 100 million or so who did not vote. And so when the person was elected and was able to appoint 3 members on the Supreme Court and overturn Roe v. Wade, the people who did not vote were affected by that decision. So you're affected by a decision that probably changed the way you think about reproductive rights when you were not engaged in that system. And so whether or not you vote or engage, policies are going to be made, appointments are going to be made, changes are going to be made within the system. And so in a representative democracy where these individuals are supposed to represent you, and they are going through a process when they are implementing policy, the president can't make law, Congress make law. And so it matters who you have in Congress to sort of check who you have in the presidency, regardless of the policy that you support. So what's at stake is also this fight against voter suppression. People are not engaged in voter suppression if they are not concerned about the electorate going out to vote in large numbers. And so why are they trying to suppress your vote? What are the issues that people who are engaged in this trying to stop from being implemented? So when you're thinking about voting and you think about what's at stake, think about it in the context that we just provided as well. And not just in, I don't like politics, are they both of them are going to do the same thing? There would have been a difference in terms of who's on the Supreme Court if one person was elected over the other.
Now, you said something really key there. It doesn't matter because both parties are doing the same things. But at the end of the day, your voice matters, your single vote matters. And another thing that you said, Dr. Stanberry, you mentioned was the popular vote. And this is sort of an excuse, I think, that people use to say that, well, My vote doesn't count anyway. Just take a look at what happened a number of years ago, uh, the 2020 election, or rather the 2016, I believe, election, where there was a popular vote, and that's who seemed to win, but it depended on the electoral college. So I kind of want to move to talking about the electoral college and the popular vote. Some people feel, um, let me just go ahead and let you continue, Dr. Stanberry. Some people feel that their vote doesn't count because it gets lumped in with others and is diluted in the electoral college. How do individual votes get counted in the presidential election?
Yes. So yes, Hillary Clinton won more popular votes in 2016 than Donald Trump. I believe it's five times in our country's history where the person who won the popular vote did not win the electoral college vote, and that does discourage individuals from wanting to vote. But we have an electoral college system in our country, and the goal is to receive 270 electoral college votes out of 538. And so the electoral vote in each state, how the electoral vote is allocated in each state is a winner take all system based on who wins the popular vote in that particular state, except for Maine and Nebraska, where it's not winner take all. So what does that mean? If 51% of supporters in North Carolina were to vote for Kamala Harris, she receives those 16 electoral college votes. In Georgia, if 51% were to vote for Donald Trump, he receives, I believe Georgia has 16 electoral college votes as well.
So he gets all of them.
He gets it because it's winner take all. Only two states where it's not winner take all, and we can talk about that as a reform. But every state, you win 51%, you receive all of those electoral college votes, which is why Democrats have a tough time winning Texas, because it's very difficult for Democrats to receive 51% of the vote in Texas.
I want to jump in here on that, and maybe either you or Dr. Jones or I think maybe Dr. Jones could address this. You know, who crafted, how was this electoral college crafted? Is it fair, and is it forever? Dr. Jones?
Right now, it's forever. It was designed to make sure that the people of the many states were represented so that there could be some balance between larger and smaller states. I also think that there is a degree to which it provides some elitist control over the elections. So, I mean, there's an argument that the Electoral College is misplaced, but today it is what we're working with. And if you live in a state where the candidate that 51% of people vote for win all of those votes, you are going to be able to deliver those votes to the electoral college meeting, and those votes will be counted towards who will become the president.
Thank you for that. And when I hear about these votes and how they get counted, that brings up even more questions for me, frankly, because we talk about the popular vote, and I know that the current rule is that we have these electoral votes, but are we even close, or has it been proposed to get rid of this electoral college? I've heard that there's a proposition, or people argue, let's get rid of the college. What kind of, would that make sense? I'm going to put this one to Dr. Perry, or is it representative already?
Oh, certainly. It's not. I don't find it to be representative. I think it's it leaves out so much of the electorate that has a serious voice, right? When we think about even down to when we think about the fact that there's so much representation for states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, but places like DC don't really have representation, right? They have two senators from those states are listed, but nobody, that have less of a population in some cases than Washington D.C., right? And so, the fact that they have so much representation found in electoral college compared to the actual populations that are voting, Not to mention, the fact that, what was it, the last Republican to win the popular vote, George W. Bush, right? Um, I mean, that's been quite some time. I wasn't still in college then, right? Um, this is a serious issue.
Thank you for that. Let's continue um, I think Dr. Jones, you wanted to comment on that as well.
Can I just make one point, which is that one of the, we're talking today about the stakes in this election and the fact that it really may impact our form of government. Now, for Black Americans, Latino Americans, other minorities, I think it's very important for you to understand that if your vote was not important, they would not be making these serious efforts to suppress your vote. I also think that once we get past this election, people need to get more savvy about the fact that there are other ways for us to vote, right? We have a two-party system, it is winner take all. And that really limits the possibilities for people when they're voting. And I understand why that makes them feel restricted, right? If you only need 51% to win, that person doesn't really necessarily appear to have a weight. And that person might not be the person that you voted for. So we need to be thinking about ranked choice voting. We need to be thinking about having a system that does a proportional seating of parties and including additional parties. I mean, we need to be thinking about there are other ways that we can come to elections so that people feel that their votes have more weight and where they will in fact have more weight. So, your sort of, but in this moment, one's concern about the Electoral College needs to be remedied by everyone turning out to vote so that we can talk about the possibility of making adjustments to the Electoral College, making adjustments to the two-party system that's 51%, because there are methods for selecting representatives that would allow people to have more of a voice.
None of which you can do if you don't come out and vote and engage. So let's talk more about the voting and engagement. Um, Dr. Perry, I know that if someone, let's talk a little bit about when you choose to vote. Um, Here in North Carolina, we have early voting, but that's not something that's available all over. Can you talk a little bit about early voting and how that works and what the benefits might be to participating if it's available in your state?
Yeah, I mean, when I was first voting as a young person, we only had, just that one day, that one Tuesday, that you could go and vote. And so now, you have these moments, you have this spectacular moment where folks in some states have the option to actually, vote early. That gets around like kind of the muck and mire that we see around, people's schedules, people, having to take off work, people having to, not pick up their kids that day in order to vote, right? Just for that one day. And so now I think, early voting kind of makes this easier, right? I remember when I was, in graduate school, we were talking about the need for like a voting weekend. I still think this would be necessary and this would be great. My state of Maryland, where I vote still, though I'm at the University of Tennessee, um, we have mail-in ballots. So, I mean, this is, incredibly important. If you have that possibility, if you have, the ability to vote outside of, coming to that brick and mortar, standing in that long line, if you can avoid the rush and get your voice heard, this is the moment to do it.
Dr. Stanberry, is there any other reason besides convenience why the early voting is particularly helpful to the end outcome?
Oh, yes. Check your registration. So many who fill out their voter registration forms may not have filled it out correctly. And the Board of Elections probably tried to reach out to you, but could not for whatever reason. And so you think you're registered to vote. And if you wait until November the 5th, which is election day this year, trying to vote, then you're out of luck, So if you attempt to vote during early vote during the early voting period, which is same day registration, early voting in North Carolina over the course of October 17th through November the 2nd, you can fix that. So if something went awry with regard to your voter registration form, you can just re-register right there and vote. And because you have a longer period of time, you don't have to vote within that, 7:30 to 7:30 timeframe. But I think the key is to ensure that there's not something amiss with regard to your voter registration form. And if there is, you can correct it during the early voting period. So I think that is key and pivotal, because we know for whatever reason, people either aren't filling the forms out correctly, or this year we have to have voter ID. And we have to have a voter identification in North Carolina. And so if you don't have that voter identification, perhaps you can go back home and come back the next day or so, and not get a provisional ballot. So,
And do you happen to know what kind of identification is allowed? I know you can go to the Board of Elections site to get information on that. But yeah, this year you've got to have that ID on the day that you go and vote, whether you're early voting or voting on the day of elections.
right,
Correct?
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah, that's helpful to know, very helpful to know. So get your ID together and help, others get their ID together too. Might be, grandma or auntie or uncle, you can participate and really be instrumental in helping the people who you are friends with, people in your circle, your family, make sure that they are ready and prepared to exercise their vote. Dr. Jones, a lot of voters might be worried about whether or not their vote is actually going to get counted. I know when I go in there and I put my little thing in the ballot, I'm like, okay, now this is getting counted, right? And so I put that little sticker on my lapel, but that's not the thing. So how can you be assured that it's getting counted specifically around the absentee and mail-in ballots? I'm just so worried about that mail-in ballot.
Okay, I have to, because I'm in Georgia, I feel like I'm about to burst. I really need voters of color to vote early in Georgia. Voter registration will be over, and so I need you to check your voter registration, because it is possible that they will purge your vote, and it is possible that the election board will not be reaching out to make sure that you are clear that your vote has been purged. Furthermore, if you don't vote in your own precinct in Georgia, uh, after it's a little bit confusing, but if you don't vote in your own precinct, you're going to end up with a provisional ballot. And if you vote that provisional ballot before 5 p.m., it's not going to be counted. And so if you are registered to vote and you end up having issues, I need you to go to early voting so that you can cure those issues in advance of the election day when they're actually going to count. Even as soon as near as last week, we have new state election board rules that say they're going to do a hand count, that say that they're going to have room to, do extra information searches before they agree to certify the election. The state legislature has passed new rules to tack on to SB 202, which is just full of mechanisms that are designed to make it more difficult for people in the state of Georgia to reach the polls. And so I beg of you, if you live in Georgia, or if you have family members who live in Georgia, I need you to ask them to vote before election day in our state, because things are extremely prickly, and the possibility of your vote being lost is real.
It's real, and that's why the provisional ballot, that's always kind of confused me. People have said, if you show up to the polling place to vote and you find that you can't, just ask for a provisional ballot. I'm like, all right, well, is that going to really count though? So get your ducks in a row in advance, because there's time right now, and there's going to be an early voting window, and it's going to close before voting day. So it's very important to go and early vote, just to make sure that your vote gets counted if you're going to take the trouble to go down there. Dr. Perry, do you have anything to add to that in terms of paying attention to the hours of voting for your polling location, and what to do if you show up and you're not on the list?
Yeah, I mean, well, asking for that provisional ballot again is incredibly important. But I mean, just to see, the possibility of your vote still counting, right? Also, just knowing, where your polling place is, knowing, where you're supposed to be at what time, right? I mean, these are kind of basic things. They sound like basic things, but when it comes down to just everyday, people voting, this is incredibly important.
But
Yeah.
these are all trusted ways of casting your ballot, showing up on voting day or early voting or submitting your absentee ballot or doing a mail-in ballot. We can all continue to use those. Dr. Stanberry, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just briefly, and I want to emphasize the urgency of voting early as well if you live in a state where you can do so. And Dr. Perry reminded me of something, and that is we have a early voting location on our campus. Where you vote early is not necessarily your precinct. So if you miss your early voting window and you're voting on election day, make sure you vote in your precinct, because the likelihood you will get a provisional ballot is if you do not vote within your within your precinct. So just keep that in mind. There are early voting sites, at least in North Carolina. There are early voting sites, and then on election day, you're voting at your precinct. So be sure to check that. So you can go to the Board of Elections, check your registration. All of that is available to you. And so it's in plain sight with regard to how you can check, at least where in our state. So take advantage of those opportunities, because those were hard fought for opportunities
They
by
certainly
various civil
were.
rights groups.
And they've already been reduced to some
They-
degree.
Again,
They have.
yes, yes.
I want to move on and talk a little bit about that decision to, for who you're going to vote for, particularly for the top of the ticket, the president's race. Some people are confused, they're undecided. They've decided, because I'm undecided, I'm really unsure that uh, what I choose might be hurtful to my community. Dr. Perry, what would your advice be to someone who is sitting it out because things are just overwhelming? They don't have their information and they would rather not vote than vote a mistake.
Um, I think not trying is the biggest mistake we can make here, right? Not being informed, not being willing to take the extra steps, not being willing to find communities in which you can, kind of find a sounding board of folks that you trust, right? Folks that you know of good moral character, that can, that you believe can act as a good sounding board, and making an adult decision to, cast your vote for the person that you find to best represent your values. I mean, particularly in this election, I have a very hard time understanding the undecided voter, right? Just because the two candidates are such a stark difference, right? Yeah, not to get into specifics, but yeah, the moral character of both are just completely different. The sort of way in which they see the world and see this country, right, are very, very, very different. I mean, particularly when we think about, those of us that are concerned about, say, things like Christian nationalism, um, concerned about things like, folks having equal rights, concerned about, women's reproductive rights. These are things that are kind of germane to the conversation. And if you, kind of leave yourself out of that conversation, then you're putting, yourself and your community at risk. Yeah.
Dr. Mhm. Dr. Jones, I want to ask you about how people can educate themselves, especially in this age of disinformation and misinformation. It's very easy to get led astray or to get the wrong information, and people, I think, are concerned about that as well. What would your advice be to people who want to do the right thing, but they've heard and they've seen on social media, on blogs, on TikTok, etc., things that disturb them about both candidates, about all candidates?
Okay, so I think this is really important. I feel as if we can all see the top candidates for president. We understand that the former president, Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris are running for president. Now, I feel as if with Kamala Harris, there has been some correction. You know, if we listen to the speech by D.L. Hughley, he talks about how he had one opinion of Kamala Harris based upon what he thought was true, and he discovered by doing some research that that was not true. So I urge you to do your research and not just rely on social media. If there are people that you look up to who are serious about voting their ballot, I would urge you to speak with them. If you are someone who does research, I would urge you to do that research and to share it with your family and friends. And I feel it's less important for the presidential race. They're very high profile. I'm really interested in you taking some time to take a look at the ballot that is going to be served to you when you get to your ballot box so that you have some education about the down ballot races. And the down ballot races are the races that are not the presidency. So, you know,
Right.
there are Congress people, of course, but in your local area, there are going to be elections for positions. I need you to be looking to get some understanding of what the public service commissioner in your area does.
And I think that one of the ways that people can prepare themselves is by going online to your local election board and downloading a sample ballot. Find out what names are on that ballot and go make Google your friend. You're using Google for other things, I'm so sure. But so why not use it for that, right, Dr. Stanberry?
You're absolutely right, and I make a point to share with students my sample ballot and show them how they can find theirs, because the names of people running for office are on that on that ballot, so you can go and research those names. This is what I don't know if we should. The date it is today is still what 3 weeks before early voting here. So that is plenty of time to go and study. You could do an office a day, right? Okay, so who's running for state rep for these two individuals? Let me research them. And so the information is there. We do have to be proactive voters as well, and not be reactive and just respond to TikTok. No offense to TikTok,
No
no sense,
offense.
but
Some of that stuff on there is
yeah.
like very revealing. It's like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't know that.
But
So-
we should endeavor to educate ourselves as well, and not be intimidated when you walk. If you don't look at your sample ballot, some people will go in there and like, okay, I thought this was just president, vice president. Look at all these other offices and constitutional amendments, right, that are on the ballot. And so print it out, do office by office every day. I'm going to learn about this particular office. You learn about an office and the people. So you may not know anything about what the city council or what state representatives do. You learn about state representatives, and then you learn about the candidates who want that position.
Absolutely. Let's take a moment to talk also about not only casting your vote on election day, but other ways to engage in the political process and make sure that you are being that good citizen and making a difference. Dr. Perry, can you talk about some different ways that you can move beyond just casting your vote on election day? People might be very excited about whoever their candidate of choice is, and they know that they're going to cast their vote, but they want to do more. What more can we do, especially younger people, to engage in the process and affect the outcome of the election?
Yeah, I mean, this is a terrific question. Just because, number one, when we think about, American politics, folks really think about the idea mainly of voting and that being your only way of casting your voice. I mean, of expressing your voice and expressing yourself and doing, some type of service to your community and to your country. For me, I wish when I was a young person in college, I wish I would have, worked on someone's campaign, found someone's, campaign to work on and just gone and canvassed for them or advocated for them in some way. I think that it is a terrific way to, not only, do justice work also to, try to make your country better and get involved in the process. I remember when, when I was in seminary, I was at the Faith and Politics Institute's. Um, they had this thing with John Lewis, and I remember, I'd seen him, a number of times off this campus, but I had never gotten to meet him in person. And being able to, shake the hand of someone who had, been an activist in Nashville and had fought for my rights and the rights of countless other, people in this country, for him to stand there and challenge me. And I remember him speaking in that thick, wonderful accent and telling me, get involved, get involved, get involved, get in the way,
Yes,
get
yes,
in good trouble. Right. And so for
absolutely.
me, I think that that's the main thing that young people need to do. They need to figure out ways that they can get involved, figure out ways to get in good trouble. Just because, your vote, you might just be one voice, but who knows who you can move, who you can inspire, right? Even, at the age of 18 to 22, 18 to 23, what have you. That is an incredibly, you know, needed effort,
And I
to
want to
have
say
young folks get out and vote. Yeah. And get out and do some work.
you're talking about young people, Dr. Perry, and I want to stick with you for half a second here because, it used to be that the church was very instrumental in making sure that Black people in particular, Black churches, got out to the polls, were engaged. They would even preach about topics from the pulpit. How can the church engage young people today? Because they're not really reaching young people in the same way they're not that they were, say 50 years ago.
I mean, they're still doing a lot of good work as far as like bringing souls to the polls. I mean, when we think about the Conference of National Black Churches, right now they have their campaign to bring up, about 70%, bring up the Black turnout to about 70%. I think that, the best thing they can do is kind of meet people where they are, right? Meet young people where they are in particular, right? Coming to those college campuses, not just solely, to spread the word. I'm all about that. That's great. But also, what can we do to, not only save souls, but save bodies, right?
Mm.
What can we do to inspire, young people to do good, right? And I think part of it would have to be engaging our campuses, coming to, North Carolina Central, God forbid they have to go to North Carolina A&T, right? My dad was a Morgan State grad, so,
Wait a
he
minute,
can't
wait a
stand
minute.
A&T to this day, because they broke that football
That's a
winning
campus
streak, right? Right. But I
power.
think that, meeting them where they are, meeting folks where they are is always the best step to engaging them. And, if you could bring some food for them, I know that was a big thing for me when I was in college, where I could get that next free plate. And if you told me you wanted to tell me about a little bit about voting, I think that would be great too. So I think, if they could meet folks where they are and bring a message that inspires them to do good, inspires them to become their better selves, I think, then churches are doing, just a little bit of their job.
Yes, yes, sir. That's a word for the church. Dr. Stanberry, did you want to add to that? Maybe talk about engaging older voters.
Well, I think first of all, the churches, given the demographics that are often at the churches, we have that provides some engagement with older voters, but we also have to keep in mind that with regard to getting out to vote, transportation issues can be an issue, can be an obstacle. There are a lot of obstacles to voting and obstacles to even getting that voter ID. And so, if you have um, family members, friends who are older and without transportation, just going up there and talking to them, you can actually talk to them about their history of voting, the challenges they've had, and just engage in that conversation about the importance of the issues that are concerned to you, whether you're older, younger, or somewhere anywhere in between. But I think ensuring that they have access to the polls are very important, and ensuring that they are not ignored. Their issues are on the table. So we, not to say certain issues are not as of concern to older voters, but we often talk about climate change, which tends to be an issue that younger voters are concerned about. We tend to talk about reproductive rights, which is an issue that younger voters are concerned about. But we also have to keep in mind that those who are older are concerned that they're going to have social safety nets, such as Social Security remaining in place. And so we have to engage in issues that affect those voters as well, because they are disproportionately older voters. Let's say 40 and older, not that 40 is older, but younger voters tend not to turn out 18 to 29 as high as voters in other categories. And so, but we still need to address their issues while we're also trying to address that 18 to 29 crowd.
I love that. Be a part of the process and the solution, rather than just sitting still or being even a part of the problem. My father even said he's getting ready to be on standby to help get people to the polls. So if my father can do it and he's aging, then we all can do something. Let me ask something about being in the ballot box or being at the polls, and say you just can't bring yourself to vote for either candidate that is listed on your ballot. And I've heard about writing in candidates. Dr. Jones, can you talk about the write-in option and what does that do for the outcome?
This is a two-party system where one of the two parties will take 51% and win. So if you're writing in our not yet proportional system, it's probably not going to give you very much leverage with regard to the candidate that you write in.
It doesn't do anything for or against either of the other candidates. It's just sort of a throwaway.
It in fact will detract probably from one or the other, right? If you were inclined to vote Republican and you decide to go with, RFK is no longer running, but let's say you were pro Donald Trump and you weren't as comfortable as you wanted to be with him and you vote for RFK, right? That takes away from President Trump's vote share ultimately in our particular system's configuration at this point.
There's a big difference in the candidates who are running, even down ballot this year. So it would definitely benefit anyone to just do a little bit of research. I'm sure you find something that you can align with values-wise, so that you feel comfortable about casting your vote. Dr. Stanberry?
Yes, let me just say, not to date myself, but I've been voting every year since I was a teen, and that was a very, very long time ago. And I've never had a candidate that I've liked 100%. I voted for candidates that I didn't even like 50%. But the fact is, someone is going to get elected, and do I want to vote for someone closely? So I choose the one who is more closely aligned to my interests and my values. Values, particularly the case in this particular election. I heard I don't recall the singer, but she recently said that she will vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. She will vote for a particular candidate, but she won't endorse that candidate. And so what she's saying is that she disagrees with where the candidate is on Gaza, but she knows that the candidate more closely aligns with her viewpoints, so she will vote for that candidate, whether it's Trump or Harris. She'll vote for that candidate, but will not endorse that candidate. So just keep in mind, I would be surprised if there's any candidate who's ever run for office that one can agree with 100%, 75%, and maybe even 50%. But in a representative democracy, you need to your vote is your currency. You need to go out and plug it in and let people know. And so that you know that you engaged in the process.
Excellent advice. A topic came up a little bit earlier in this conversation, and it has to do with voter roll purging. In fact, an article came out recently about over 700,000 individuals on the voter rolls being purged from the North Carolina list. And I did a little bit more research on that. But um, what do you do if you've been purged from the voter rolls? But how do you find out if that's you, Dr. Jones?
You check your registration. So you want to be doing that, in my opinion, up until the last day of registration to make sure that you are registered. We've had issues here in the state of Georgia, and they keep reiterating we already had the right for people to challenge your registration and attempt to push you off the rolls. Then they reiterated that in SB 202. They've reiterated it again this year. So there's some stimulation in addition to the power to challenge people and, hem up the possibility of them being registered. So I think it's really important that up until, for us, October 7th, you check your registration to ensure that that you can see it. And if you can't see it, you register again. And you just try to be as diligent as possible so that you know what's happening with your registration. And that's a new responsibility. In past years, once you were registered, it was pretty set. But now we need to be more diligent.
And if you have to register again, does anyone know how long it takes to get that official feedback that, okay, now you're registered again?
Well, if
Who
you,
would want to take that?
well, I
Dr.
would just,
Stanberry?
I would just do with regard to same-day registration. If your state has same-day registration, you're registered, it takes a few minutes to register again. If you go down directly to the Board of Elections, you register, you're giving them your form directly. So I guess it depends on what mechanism one is using to register again. And I would emphasize, check your voter registration. We check our Facebook, all our social media constantly. Add checking your voter registration to that. So check your voter registration just to be sure. But it shouldn't take a long time. It shouldn't take long to register again. The thing is not knowing that you're not registered.
Well, certainly after that article came out,
read
I checked
that.
mine. Did
Yeah.
you check yours?
I check mine all the time.
Yeah, because I do not want to show up, on voting day for them to say, oh, wait a minute, because I moved recently as well. Right. And for college kids, where do they vote? Do they vote in their home state or do they vote where they are attending college?
They can vote where they attend college. In fact, there was a Supreme Court case that came as a result of Prairie View A&M students in 1979. I want to say the Sims case, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. But after the 26th Amendment was ratified in 1971, giving 26-year-olds the right to vote, you had this pushback against students who were living on college campuses. And so Prairie View A&M students got a case into the court system, and essentially, as a result of that case, college students were able to vote where they're attending school. So, but you have to make that decision. I mean, some college students will say, I want to do absentee, still vote back home. And some college students will change their registration here because they are living here. And I believe as long as you're changing it within, there's a certain time frame, you're okay. And most of them are coming in are August 18th or 19th. So they're they're changing registration within the time that they are able to do so.
You can definitely check with your local state board of elections to verify what the situation is in your particular state. I know that the State Board of Elections website here in North Carolina is very easy to read and very thorough in the information it provides. Here's a question for all three of you. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Jones. Another way to participate, and I get solicitations for this all the time. This is a high stakes election. Please make a contribution. I feel like, look, I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote, but why does my money make such a big difference? Why is that allowed to make such a big difference in the outcome of the election, Dr. Jones?
These campaigns cost quite a bit of money. The media access that they're taking advantage of has high cost. So the candidates with more money have more flexibility and ability to ingratiate themselves with the bulk of voters. And I want people to understand that even your small money, particularly on a consistent basis, can have an impact. I think when people think about making donations, they feel as if it's going to break their bank. Don't do that. Send $1 a week, or send $4 a month, or send your $2. You know, it's really not about the amount. Consistent donations make a big difference also. Can I just go back to the question about where to vote? I think that, in today's age, if you are in a swing state, if your state is not solidly red or blue, then consider voting where you came from. But if your home state as a college student is solidly red or blue, then you might want to vote in the state of Georgia or North Carolina or Wisconsin or Michigan, depending on where you go to school. So I think there is some math to be done about where your vote is going to have the most leverage.
Good advice, very good advice. Dr. Perry, any thoughts about making campaign contributions?
Yeah, I mean, I think often it is the candidate's ability to ring in the small donors, right? That can often turn one's campaign, right? That's what I've constantly seen. It's not always just the big donor, but one's ability to bring in the donor that brings in $20, $30, here and there, you know, that can often kind of turn a campaign, right? I think that is often what matters.
I think there's a certain sense of accomplishment and satisfaction also that comes with that donation. I mean, when you make that contribution, you're saying something not only with your vote but with your dollars, and there's strength in that. Um, did you want to share anything about that as well, Dr. Stanberry?
Oh, I concur absolutely with what you just said. I remember my first campaign contribution was actually as a college student. And we had an individual who was actually running the third party campaign at the time who said, if all of you send me $19, we could make a difference. And I'm sending $19 to a billionaire. He was actually a billionaire. I can say, I guess, Ross Perot, but dating myself again. But I was a college student and I literally didn't have any money. My family, we didn't have much, but I was so into politics, and he was talking about the issues dealing with the deficit, issues dealing with Washington, D.C. are not responsive to the people, not listening. And that resonated with me, and I sent him $19. And I get, as Dr. Jones said, as both said, it costs a lot of money to run these campaigns, those television commercials, staff. And so that money, unfortunately, is important because we don't have public financing of elections. We need to elect people to support things such as public financing of elections, ranked choice vote, who supported ranked choice voting, proportional representation, rest in peace, Lonnie Guinier. We need to support those types of candidates, but it costs too much to run elections. And as long as it costs a lot, they're going to be asking a lot of their supporters.
And what you're saying about just being a steady contributor as opposed to a one big lump, it does make a difference, not only in elections, but also as an alumnus of a university. They need us making a regular, steady contribution, and it's more important than, making when tremendous contribution. Dr. Jones, did you want to add?
I was just big upping what you're saying. When I've made donations, it's been made clear to me that the big, huge, fantastic donations are wonderful, but the steady, small donations allow organizations, campaigns to plan their budgets. And so, your small but consistent money still creates a voice for you and allows you to make what is a beneficial contribution to an institution like your HBCU or to someone's campaign. Obama if you don't remember, won the presidency with very small donations from lots of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're about to wrap up here. There's one more question I want to get out there before we go. And we only have a couple of minutes left, and that has to do with what happens on election night. Just suppose that that one candidate gets their 270 and the other one doesn't, and they want to contest that. Are there more pathways to victory for that person today who does not get 270 electoral, is it 270? 270 electoral votes, in terms of how this gets certified today? Dr. Stanberry.
Well, I'm not sure about the pathways to victory because 270 is 270, but so after election night, votes are actually certified in December. So electors meet in their respective state capitals around the nation, and you have what is called faithless electors. So electors are supposed to be committed to the person who wins, the candidate who wins 51% of the vote in their state. But suppose the pressure is on those faithless electors not to do that. And then if everybody does vote the way their state does, will we have another January 6th? You remember Donald Trump said, come to DC on January 6th. It's going to be wild because that's where the Congress is certifying the votes. But this time around, Biden is in office, and so he may react quicker in terms of bringing out reinforcement. So I'm not sure what, maybe you all can let me know what other pathways would be there. If someone reaches 270, technically, it's not certified until December.
And who are the certifiers again, Dr. Jones?
State legislators.
Well, I'm concerned about certification in my state, right? As I was saying earlier, a new law makes it possible. First of all, we've seen in several states now, county precinct leaders not want to certify. So that issue has already become live. The former president called down to my state for 11,270 votes, had a slate of fake electors set up to go to Washington, D.C. And right now we have the possibility of holding up the certification with some of these new rules that have been passed this year. And so returning to our first point about turning out to vote this time, it will behoove us to have very clear understanding of who the winner is in this particular election. Whether the former president complains about it or not, it is going to be made slightly easier by having clarity about who won. If the totals are too close, that's just gonna make it even worse. I don't know if people are gonna get violent or how problematic it will be. We see that the former president is loath to lose. So that is another reason why people should get out there and make their choices clear.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I want to give each of you an opportunity to just share your final thoughts, starting with you, Dr. Perry.
Yeah, I just want to take this very important moment to remind everyone that a vote is not a Valentine. You are not voting for your to try to get a third date. You are voting for someone you think meets your moral standards, someone who's not, their policies meet your moral standards. What do you think this person will do with the 3 a.m. phone call when everything is about to fall apart? What do you think this person would do if there were another pandemic? What do you think this person would do when choosing that next Supreme Court justice that may or may not believe that you have the right to choose? Or maybe that Supreme Court justice wants to bring us back to pre-1954 racial realities. We need to put these things to mind when we place our ballot. And that, I think if we keep that in mind, that it's not a Valentine. You're not voting for the cutest person you can find. You are voting for someone. You are voting for someone whose pen can shape your future. And I'm not talking about drawn pictures.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Dr. Perry. Dr. Jones, last thoughts.
I think I want to reiterate the importance of, particularly for our students, getting involved. I'm really pleased that the Democratic Party switched their candidate because I feel like it raised the energy and of the race, and I could see my students in the AUC really get involved. And that's going to be critical past election time, regardless of who wins. The fact that students are participating and they're excited and they're registering to be poll watchers and agreeing to drive senior citizens to the polls and canvassing and participating in campaigns. It's going to be really important, whoever wins, that we be participatory in the system. And this is a really good start for that. So please, if you haven't signed up to do something, do so, and get out and vote in November.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanberry.
Yes, I agree with a lot of what Dr. Jones said, particularly with regard to let's not even make it close. I mean, whichever side you're on, let's go out there and vote in numbers, because we never reached like even 80% turnout at the presidential level. You know, we had 65% or so in 2020, and that was one of the larger turnouts. My final thoughts, and I began by talking about this off mic, and I think about the Reconstruction era a lot, and I think about the expansion of the electorate, and I think about the backlash to that of that expansion of the electorate, and we can't let that continue to happen. We hear these voices that are making it seem as if inclusion, multiracial democracy is a bad thing. And thus laws are in place to try to prevent that. We have to vote like that is on the ballot as well, and what we want to see as our country, as a nation, what we want to see as representative of who we are, and that is a multicultural, pluralistic nation. People have different ideas, and they shouldn't be attacked, or it should be okay to have different ideas, and we shouldn't be constantly trying to limit the expansion of the electorate, including, in the question we can get to, those who have felony convictions. People should be able to vote. If you can run for office with a felony conviction, you should be able to vote as well. But get out there and vote. Your vote count, your vote matters. And it's just so important to participate in your government. This is your government. This is you. This is our democracy.
Couldn't have been better stated. Thank you so much, Dr. Artemisia Stanberry. Also, Dr. Adrian Jones and Dr. Larry Perry II. Thank you so much for your time. And I want to thank everyone who has tuned in to this conversation. We appreciate you spending the time with us. And I want to just encourage you once again, get involved, engage, get out and vote, have your voice heard, because it matters. Every single vote, every single person's voice matters. For WNCU 90.7, I'm Deborah Holt Noel. Thank you again for joining us.